Jai Hari Kirtan ki Jai. Shri Shri Dadi Gopal ki Jai. Uma Gyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshuru Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Ajnulambita Bhujo Kanakabadatu Sankirtanai Kapituro Kamalaya Taksho Vishwambaro Dvijabaro Yugadharma Kalo Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karunavataro Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gurudaya Pushpavanto Chitro Sando Tamuno Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhaya Charana Sukho Suprado Paramanando Sundaro Subala Priyo Hey Krishna Karuna Sendo Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radhakanta Namostuje Tapta Kanchan Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishwabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Shri Gauri Vaishnava Guru Parampara Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Oh, Premanandi. Good morning. Nice to be with you all again. We're continuing our discussion of the Brahma Vimohan Lila. At this point, Krishna has manifested himself into all the forms of the boys and calves, and he has been received in those forms by the calves and the cows with an extra measure of affection. And at the same time, while the mother's affection for them has increased, their affection for Krishna has also increased at the same time. Because as we've heard, their affection is based on everything except the beauty which is lacking, which is found in him. Sham Sundar. Not that the other boys and calves aren't beautiful, but somehow he outshines them nonetheless, right? So today we come to a new section, and it begins thus. Ekada charayan vatsam saramo vanam abhishat pancha shasu tri yamasu hayana puranash ajha. So the text says that 5 or 6 days before the end of the year from which this Brahma Vimohan section began, which the beginning of which, of course, is going on the picnic in Balaram by the force of parental affection, remaining behind, which is uncharacteristic. Characteristically, he won't miss a day in herding with Krishna and his friends, he being the elder brother and the best friend of Krishna. But here it says that about 5 or 6 days before the end of the year, Krishna, tending the calves, entered the forest along with Balaram. So it doesn't mean to say that he isn't going every day. He is. He's going every day, and everything appears, even to Balaram in Braj, to be just without change, as usual. the upswell of affection for the boys that he himself feels is compensated for by the fact that his affection for Krishna has increased as well. So there just seems to be no difference. There are some extraordinary things taking place. As we've heard, the measure of the mother's affection, the cow's affection for the calves, but for some reason, he isn't noticing it. So what the text is informing us is that on this particular day, 5 or 6 days before the end of the year, they enter the forest. Aja, he's described, Krishna, along with Balarama. It's another occasion in which this word Aja, name, Aja epithet, which means unborn, is invoked. And of course, the subtle implication here is he who was unborn, Krishna, had many mothers, not nonetheless. So he's unborn, and his birth, if you will, and the motherhood, the parental affection that he encounters, experiences, this is all within the realm of eternity. Right? When the unborn takes birth, how are we going to understand it? So the implication here, of course, is that on this day, Krishna is going to arrange, his Lila Shakti is going to arrange, his Yogamaya is going to arrange for the underlying facts, if you will, that Krishna has expanded himself as all the cowherds and the calves will start to become clear to Balaram. After all, Balaram is different than everybody else in Braj. And you would think he should know because, well, he's God himself, right? First we have Krishna, Swami Bhagavan, and Swami Bhagavan has some expansions of himself in Braj that are replicas, if you will, of himself. For example, we saw this earlier. When he sat with all the cowherd boys at lunch, he manifested himself before all of them. So each manifestation looked exactly the same, had the same temperament, disposition. It's Krishna. He does this in the Rasa Lila also by expanding with all the gopis. What is this called? Tadekatma Rupa. This is one type of way in which Krishna expands himself in the Braj Lila. And the other way is by Bhava Prakash. And there's only one of them, and that's Balaram. That means he's non-different from Krishna, but he has a different, he's one in tattva with Krishna, but he has a slightly different disposition, temperament. His emotional composition is different. And correspondingly, he has a different complexion. He's fair in complexion, and Krishna's dark in complexion. So typically the complexion has some correspondence with the emotional content of a person, just like with hot colors, cold colors, this color, that color, and so forth. It's maybe a little more played out and detailed in Indian aesthetics. For each of the rasas, there's a corresponding color and a presiding deity and so forth. We might think, understandably, that Balaram would be the presiding deity over Sakyarasa, but actually he's the presiding deity over Hasyarasa, which among the rasas is the best friend of Sakyarasa. It's a secondary rasa, plays a big role in their lives. According to, you might ask or be wondering, then who does preside over Sakyarasa? Well, according to Indian aesthetics, which is, of course, prior to Rupa Goswami's drawing from it and coming out with his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, where he uses terms from Indian aesthetic sensibilities to describe the world of ecstasy and explain Vedanta, a Vedanta of aesthetics, aesthetic Vedanta. So there it's mentioned that Vamandev presides over. Vaman is the dwarf who's appears as like the younger brother of Indra, and has a brotherly relationship with Indra. Of course, Well, we could try to stretch that from a Gaudiya point of view and separate ourselves to some extent from the past of Indian aesthetics, which is not something unprecedented, to bring in some new insight into it. And of course, what I mean by that is that Vamana's other name is Upendra. Upendra. It means like he's the friend of Indra, Upendra, or he's even above Indra, but they're friends. Now, the point I'm making, of course, is that during the Govardhana Lila, Krishna received the epithet and was crowned king of the cows, Govinda, by Indra, and in agreement with all the other gods who were assembled at that time. Right? Govinda Kund was formed by the bath, celestial bath coming through the trunk of Airavata, the carrier, elephant carrier of Indra. At that time, so many gifts were given to Krishna by the different gods and so forth. So he was named Govinda, but in some texts, the name is given as Upendra. So Go, of course, means cows. Go means earth. Go means the Vedas. It means a lot of things. So there's a way in which we can say the name of Govinda, the name of Upendra is the same. We could say, we'll take Upendra in that context and make Krishna the presiding deity over Sakyarata. Rupa Goswami didn't do that. Nonetheless, our subject here is Balaram. And he is the presiding deity over Hasya Rasa, and that Rasa, as I say, amongst the Rasas, is the best friend of Sakyarasa. Mention that his emotional composition is different, and that comes out here in this section of the text, because he is composed of a combination of bhavas that are centered around his Sakya. This is called, and I think we've mentioned it before, Sankul Bhav, a packaging together of more than one rasa, wherein one rasa is prominent, but the other one is also present and sometimes takes precedence. So Balaram's Sankul is composed of primarily fraternal love, and it's packaged together with servile or dasya bhakti and parental or vatsalya bhakti. Now, in Braj, it's very clear that primarily Balaram is defined by his fraternal love. He's the best friend of Krishna. They're everywhere together. I mean, the whole Bhagavatam, they brought up their childhood, they're together, they're described as practically inseparable, right? This is a very extraordinary occasion that he's separate. There's a couple of them, but there's a big reason behind it, of course, as we're seeing. But the fact that he is the friend of Krishna, that's the defining emotion, is very apparent in Braj. Now, the fact that he's an elder brother also comes into play, obviously. And the Vatsalya Rasa of Yashoda, of which she is the pinnacle. This is the full face of Vatsalya Rasa in eternity, right? She is always fostering her Vatsalya onto Balaram, the older brother. He's only like a week or 8 days older. So, but nonetheless, the older brother has some, should have some respect, and his opinion will be second only to the father, and so on and so forth. A guru figure, if you will, an elder. It's funny to think of somebody 8 days older as an elder. And for the most part, they're described practically as twins at the same time. But again, this is part of his emotional composition, and that Vatsalya feature is something that Yashoda will lean on, play on, foster, just not in a conscious effort, but just naturally, the flow of Vatsalya. Protect Krishna, make sure this happens. And we see him coming and reporting on Krishna at her behest. What happened today? Oh, he ate dirt. What? bring him here. That caused a little rift between. How could you tell on me? He said, Krishna to Balarama. What kind of friend are you? But he's charged to do so, if you will, by the fate of being the older brother and by the force of the affection, Vatsalya, of Yashoda, which causes to bring this out to some extent in the Braj. Secondarily to his fraternal love, no doubt, but here we refer to him as Dauji. I mean, he's the elder brother, right? Quite often, artistically speaking, in painting, sculpture, and so forth, the custom has been over centuries to depict the older brother by making him a little bit bigger than the younger brother. We undo that here. I have my reasons for that, but you'll see that quite often. The deity of Balarama is a little bigger than the deity of Krishna. It's an artistic way of saying he's the big brother. So it is a prominent feature, not compared to his fraternal emotions, but it does come up regularly. And there are a number of examples, right? Now, the other feature, as I mentioned, of his emotional makeup is his dasyabhav, and that we don't see very much at all. But there is one instance of it that's prominent, by which we know that it's there and we underscore it. I'll get to it. I'm sure you know where it is. It's right here in this Lila. But before we go into that, which is where we've arrived today, more or less, outside of the Braj, Krishna expands as Vasudeva Krishna, and Balarama expands as Mahasankarshan for Leelas, Mool Sankarshan, the root of Sankarshan. This Sankarshan is a name that he was given along with Balarama at birth for different reasons. His capacity to often thought, in an external sense, to bring the two together. That means the Braj people and the Yadus, because he's the son of Vasudeva. So to bring them together, Sankarshan, to attract them together. There's other ways in which it plays out as well. But it's one of his names at birth, and he is referred to as such, Mool Sankarshan, as he appears in Mathura and in Dwarka. And as we move in the Lila, as the Lila moves in this way, at least apparently, because Krishna is never absent from Vrindavan, so we might reason as well, Balarama must be there too. But it's in a hidden way, of course, right? Krishna's there, we know, because, as I said the other day, it may be hard to convince someone that there's God, but it's not that hard to convince someone that there's love of God if they're a little bit objective, because we can point to examples of sadhus transcending the boundaries, ordinary boundaries of human constraints, right? Harnessing their humanity and so on and so forth. So, we don't know because I haven't made the point, but the point I'm making is that Krishna must be present in Vrindavan, even in his apparent absence in Mathura and Vrindavan, because the love for him is so strong, in fact, grows in his absence, and it exceeds in measure of intensity the love that is found that corresponds with him in Mathura and then in Dwarka. In Dwarka, he's physically present, but the queens know that actually he's more present in Vrindavan, even in his apparent absence, because the love for him is greater there. So there cannot be, point being, love of God without God. He's there in their love in separation. He's present. So when Mool Sankarshan goes to Mathura and Dwarka, the point we're making here is there we begin to see this dasyabhav part of his emotional makeup, become more prominent. In fact, in Dwarka, it exceeds his fraternal love, and you find him more in that role. We go beyond there, of course, to his expansion as Anantasesh, and there he is, lying down as the couch for Vishnu, as the umbrella, so on and so forth, overtly. Now, he does this in Vrindavan also, but this is, you have to know a little philosophy to understand that he's the bedstead. Of course, we might call that the way he participates in romantic love. That's another thing, indirectly. But otherwise, he manifests as the shoes of Krishna, the umbrella over his head, and so on and so forth. The Brahman thread, well, that would be later after he leaves Vrindavan, around his chest, so on his head, on his feet, in everything in between. Balarama is there. It's an Ram. Of course, Krishna is a Brahman, so he's got the thread. Nityananda Prabhu is the thread. He's the umbrella, he's the shoes, so on. So, outside of Braj, then this servile Dasya Bhakti of Balaram becomes more prominent, more evident, directly in himself as Mul Sankarshan, and obviously in the expansions of Anantasesh, in which he accompanies every Vishnu avatar. It's interesting to note that it's said in love, at least in English, the three is a crowd. Understandably. But wherever there is Lakshmi Narayan, Ananta is there. And he's not an obstacle. He's facilitating. But in Braj, of course, he can't be, that's another thing. But he has to be a little bit in the background there. Because there the love is in the background as well. It's Bharakiya, it's hidden, right? At any rate, there is one place in Braj where we find this Dasya Bhakti. This is the only one that I know of that is mentioned in the description of the Prakat Lila we find in the Bhagavatam, which speaks to its rarity and the extent to which, again, the fraternal love and the Vatsalya are more prominent therein. But it's important that it shows up here, because if it wasn't, we would say, well, Balaram only has these two, and then Mul Sankarshan has this, and it's those two, and not this one and not the other, but they're all in Balaram, and all three of these, of course, are sentiments that are prominent in Braj: Vatsalya Bhakti, Dasya Bhakti, and Fraternal Bhakti, and that is called Sambandha Rupa. The path to attain it is Sambandhanuga, the division of Raganuga, and Balaram presides over all three of these. Dasya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya. So Sakya, Vatsalya, and Dasya. Excuse me. Madhurya, well, that's another thing. It's worth, I suppose, mentioning, slip of the tongue, when we talk about it. Balaram, as I said, can't directly participate in the romantic life of Krishna and Balaram, because he's Krishna and Radha and Krishna, because being the elder, he'll get in the way and cause, as Vatsalya Ras does, when he'll be perceived as the elder brother, cause the romantic love to contract, and Radha will become more formal with respect for the elder brother and so forth, right? There's the expansion of himself as Anantasesh, that he's the flower bed and so on and so forth. You can say that in that way, indirectly, he participates. But he's not described in this way, as to say that Madhurya is part of his emotional composition. There is one place, I should say, in the Braj where there's a possibility that this comes up. How does it come up? That is when Balaram returns at Krishna's request to Vrindavan to pacify the residents there, and he speaks with the gopis. At that time, he is involved in appeasing them on behalf of Krishna with regard to their romantic relationship. Now, most of the commentators see this as the Vatsalya of Balaram playing a role, where he has respect for Krishna's gopis, and they respect him and so forth. But in Priti Sandarbha, it's worth mentioning that Jiva Goswami seems to see him in that light for a moment as a Narmasaka. So the romanticism would come in that way. Narmasakas are those friends that actively participate in Krishna's romantic life by helping the divine couple meet and pacifying them and so on and so forth. So there are some different opinions, different ways of looking at it. But overall, this is the main ideas, these three bhavas. Later on, that means Dasya, Vatsalya, and Sakya. Later on in Gaudiya Sampradaya, there are other opinions, some of which are not entertained by the Goswamis, and our departure from that, whereby there's an effort to put Nityananda and Balaram directly into Madhurya Rasa and everything else, every rock, every stone, every frog, every bird, and so forth. If it's coming out of Bhav, maybe there's some place for it, but if it's a forced idea, that's another thing. And we see that, unfortunately. So at any rate, here we get an opportunity to see in strong measure the Dasya Bhav component of Balaram express itself. How is that? Well, he is Balaram, so he's different than everybody else. He's omniscient like Krishna, although he's also Mugdha like Krishna, totally absorbed in the love there. At this point, of course, he's just a young boy like Krishna. He doesn't have any girlfriends. That's another thing. Krishna, Balaram may have girlfriends to complicate things. That's a separate issue. Those are married girls. He marries later on. That's not Parakiya. That's not the focus of Balaram that we get through the lens of the Vrindavan Goswamis. The focus is his Ragmarg love for Krishna as his friend. Worth mentioning. But he is, again, Balaram, so it's understandable that while everyone, including himself, is bewildered by the moham, by the illusion created by Krishna, in which everyone thinks nothing's happened, and in fact, something very extraordinary has happened. Brahma doesn't know about it because he hasn't returned to the scene yet, which for him would just be a minute or so, and which is a year in the time of earthly time, right? So everyone's going on as if nothing's happened, and something very extraordinary has actually happened. And there is some even evidence to that you might take notice of it. Particularly, let's say, the affection of the cows for the calves that exceeds the affection they have for their newborn calves. But it goes unnoticed in a wave of increased affection. But at this point, Balaram starts to come out of it. And he starts to come out of it because Krishna wants to come out of it, wants him to come out of it, and wants to reveal to him everything that happened. He waited all this time, 364 days, 360 days, 359 days, 58 days, 5 or 6 days before the end of the year, to start to allow his yoga maya to relax the illusion that she's created, the magic that she's orchestrated, that has even covered Balaram in terms of the underlying facts, extraordinary feat of Krishna. And had this happened earlier, well, if Balaram had been, he could have been revealed to him the first day or something like that. But Krishna hesitated. The thought is because, well, Balaram is not in that prakash, that dimension where the Leela is going on as if nothing happened, right? With the original boys and Krishna. Krishna's bringing the calves back. It just took a minute. We talked about this. In that dimension, Balaram's not present. There, Krishna is experiencing love with his cowherd boyfriends without any separation from them. When he expands as all the boys, Balaram's not particularly feeling separation from them because, well, Krishna's taking their place, acting like them. But if he was to find out what happened, then he might feel some separation from those boys and think, they're in that, that's going on in that Prakash. I can't just pop in there. No, that won't work, because I'm gone for that day. So Krishna waited all this time, and now 5-6 days before the completion of the year, at which time, well, Brahma would return, and this would come out. Now it could be hid still from Balarama, because what? In a year's time, all those parents are going to hold him back again. Right? Arguably, that monthly birthday that was being celebrated, held him back, would occur again. He can be held back. But whether that would have happened or not, we cannot say. Nonetheless, Krishna thought, he's my brother. He might find out somehow or other. I better let him know. Because if I don't let him know, then he'll have other complaints. And I didn't share such a fascinating thing with him, which includes the liberation of Aghasura, so on and so forth. So here, through the arrangement of Yogamaya, then the affection between the cows and the calves comes out in a very pronounced sense, and Balarama takes notice of it for the first time. And let's go there. And we come to the second verse of the section. It says what? That thereafter, while pasturing atop Govardhan Hill, on top of Govardhan, the cows looked down to find some green grass and saw their calves pasturing in the distance. The idea here is that, of course, the Govardhan is more pronounced in terms of its length than in terms of its height. It's 7 miles long. So to do the circumambulation, the parikram is a 14-mile walk. Sanatana Swami used to do that at an age older than I am. Keeping in good shape there. At a certain point, it said that Krishna thought he was too old, so he manifested as a stone, right? Just circumambulate the stone, that'll be sufficient. I think he put his footprint in it. That stone is preserved at the Radha Damodar temple in Vrindavan. Radha Damodar ki jai, Vijay Govardhan ki jai. So 7 miles long, and it has now 3 major peaks, the highest of which is about 100 feet. It's not that tall, but it's quite long. It's thought to be shrinking by the size of a sesame seed every year in separation from Krishna. Different ways to talk about that, but that is a common one. Now, the position of Govardhan is interesting, and the fact that it's brought up here in relation to Balaram's coming out of the illusion created by Krishna. There's an argument can be made that Balaram can be identified himself with Govardhan. Just as an aside, it's worth bringing up. In Rupa Goswami's Dan Keli Kumudi, Lila narrative, drama, in which Dan Keli, Krishna sets up a toll gate on Govardhan and charges the gopis for passing. Of course, the charge that he wants is Radha's love, and it's a long and beautiful intrigue, and his Narmasakas are Krishna's intimate friends participate in that. He set up a toll gate, said, I own this property here. So actually it's owned by Emperor Kamadev. And I am the king under the emperor. And he's appointed me here to finally find those cowherd ladies who are picking flowers here and stealing flowers from the area. And smuggling goods, milk and things like that in exchange for other things without paying any tax in the kingdom. If you live in the kingdom, you have to pay your taxes. These girls are very wily and sly and difficult to catch. So Krishna says, I've been appointed here. I'm going to get the revenue due to the king. So this is really an instance, one of the many in which we understand this is a dramatic comedy, a romantic comedy, the whole thing. The Lila is a romantic comedy. So at any rate, this takes place on Govardhan Hill, and in Rupa Goswami's description of this, at one point, Vrinda Devi looks at Govardhan and says, just see Govardhan Hill. He is better than Ananta Seish, which is Balaram's expansion, right? He is better than Ananta Seish because he has many peaks, many heads. It said that previously it had more peaks. This is the old descriptions of Govardhan. Now it only has three major peaks. It had many peaks, many heads, and serves as a playground for Krishna. So Ananta Seish puts his umbrella over Vishnu's head, and Vishnu lies there. That's one thing, but he doesn't turn his serpent body into a whole playground. So she says he must be the source of Ananta Seish. It's an argument for identifying Balaram with Govardhan, who Govardhan is both God and the devotee of God. The three peaks, some may argue, is one peak is his Vatsalya, one peak is his Sakya, one peak is his Dasya. What about the romanticism and the playground that he provides for that? That's a secret. That can't stand up like a tower. That's hidden. Balaram is described by Radha herself in the Bhagavatam. I don't know if Maharaj got to this verse in his discussion of the Venu Gita, right? But Haridas Varya, you might have heard. I don't know. Did you get that far? No. She turns to Govardhan in Bhagavatam and refers to him as the best servant of Hari, Haridas Varya. Balaram is the best servant of Hari. You can make the same argument for others as well, but this is a prominent case can be made for Balaram. So there are different ways, theologically, there's room for different opinions, but this is one. And here, Govardhan is called out. The cows are on top of Govardhan, and the point is here, they're seeing grass pasture at quite a distance. Some charges said the distance is like from the highest peak of Govardhan to Radhakund, which is, Govardhan is sometimes described as looking like a peacock, and his head is, the two eyes are Radhakund and Shamakund. So this is a pretty far, it's 7 miles long. So it's pretty far to get from any one of those peaks down to the Radhakund area. Now, at this point in the Prakat Lila, Radhakund and Shamakund have not been manifest. So the idea is they were pasturing grounds. There was nice meadows there of grass. And there, the calves, under the care of the boys, were grazing. And the cows, here it's described, from on top of the hill, they ostensibly saw the grass to go for that, but in reality, they're going to race down the hill in order to give their milk to the calves. And they've already had other calves now, again, it's a year later. These calves are like 2 times removed from the milking queue, right? So now this is what Balaram saw. I've given the translation of a few verses here. The cows grazing on grass atop Mount Govardhan saw their calves foraging at a distance close to the village and were overcome with affection for them. Self-forgetful, they hastened downhill over terrain difficult for even experienced herdsmen to traverse. Driven by their affection, they ran with their 2 front and 2 back feet so close together that it appeared that they were adeptly running on only 2 legs instead of 4. They looked like bipeds instead of quadrupeds. Heads and tails raised, their necks stretching, humps swaying, they made lowing sounds as milk gushed from their udders. They hightailed it down the hill. You might have heard this in English term. This is where it comes from. Hightail it home. Hurry up and get home. It's an old saying from agricultural, rural America. That's what it's about. Cows, they lift up their tail high when they run. Hightailing. So they hightail it down the hill. Then upon catching up to their calves, they made them drink their milk while licking their limbs as if about to swallow them, despite the fact that they had already been weaned. So the point is that they're atop Govardhan Hill, like near one of the peaks, and they have to go a long distance, and they're racing down there, and nothing can get in their way. And the terrain is difficult to traverse. It's rocky and it's downhill and so on and so forth. And now, what will come next, of course, is the cow herdsmen, the elders who are herding the cows, they'd suddenly take off after them and make their way down there. And they're making their way down there behind them, and they're very frustrated, and they're a little upset with the boys. Why are you bringing the cows so close, even though they're actually quite a distance? They're still not able to quite put it together that something extraordinary has happened here. That's making the cows go. So they're going to blame their sons and so forth. Why don't you bring the calves there? Here are the cows. We're racing after them. So it's quite a scene, as described in the Bhagavatam. And Balarama's looking at this, going, "Wait a minute." Now his head's starting to swell. What's going on here? Why is this happening? And you have to ponder it, for different reasons. What's the possibility? Gradually, then the illusion created by Krishna will start to dissipate, and he'll come to the right conclusion. Meanwhile, before that happens, as I said, the cow herdsmen, the elders, they arrive, and they're a little upset with their boys, about to chastise them, and they see them, and they just melt. Grab them, smell their heads, sign of affection in brudge, and fondle them, and so forth. And the cows are left free to give all their milk to the calves, and they forget about it, and so forth. So Balarama's seeing this as well, and he really figured out, something's going on here. This is extraordinary. What could cause this? It said then the cow herdsmen left for carrying on with their service of herding the cows, separating from the boys, and they wept the entire way. They wept and wept and could hardly keep up herding the cows, having had contact in the middle of the day, which ordinarily wasn't the case, with their boys who were herding, who were all manifestations of Krishna. It's said that in the verse, the term anurag is used. I've mentioned this before. Anurag is not a stage of the prem of Vatsalya Bhakti that is attained, not a stage of intensification of prem that is attained typically in Vatsalya Rasa. Rupa Goswami finds the Vatsalya Bhakti to intensify to sneha and rag, but not anurag, not mahabhav. Anurag is an intensification of rag, right? But here in the verse of the Bhagavatam, it said, and the cows, the cow herdsmen, they showed anurag. Now, how will we harmonize this? Rupa Goswami not contradicting the Bhagavatam. The general idea is he's given there, but here this is, as we understand, this is an exceptional situation here. So given the exceptional circumstances where Krishna has become their sons, The argument is obviously, well, for this time, how you can measure that. You said their affection increases. Well, how from rag down to rag, that would be a measurement, right? This, of course, brings to mind the fact, or what we've explained before, that Braj Leela's Prakat Leela, the manifest Leela, is a portal to the Aprakat Leela. What do we mean by that? We mean that in order to enter the Aprakat Leela, that intensification of one's bhav, whether it be dasya, sakya, vatsalya, or madhurya, has to take place. These are all relative to the prem of Braj. You're not going to find this in Vaikuntha. So if you want to go to Vaikuntha, you can go direct. It's not that easy, but you can. And there are different ways you can go. Even by mixed bhakti, karma mishra bhakti, you can go there. But that's not easy to be a perfect varnashrami and do bhakti at the same time. But we don't do that kind of mixed bhakti. And our goal is not Vaikuntha. Of course, you can go there for prema and pure bhakti of that type as well, as we've mentioned. But the point is that you don't have to take birth in the Prakat Leela, and there isn't one. There are some Leela avatars coming out of Vaikuntha here and there, that's true. But there's no Prakat Leela per se, in the same sense that there is of the Braj's Aprakat Leela, which is, for that matter, human-like and so forth. But to enter into the Aprakat Leela, to Goloka, then typically, characteristically, you have to go through the Prakat Leela, where this type of intensification of the Saibhav can take place in association with those who have those that intensification, Nityasiddha devotees. That intensification is not required for Vaikuntha. So we can go from here to Vaikuntha. But from here we go, if we want to enter Braj, to the Prakat Leela. So it's a portal in this sense, where this intensification can take place. And here's an example. Now the mothers have been there. This is the Prakat Leela. So they've been born there. They've grown up. They've been born there before Krishna's been born, to be mothers. They have their own sons. And they're still, at least among the sadhana siddhas of Vatsara Bhav, they need this intensification. So this is a portal. We say that this particular, through this Leela in particular, you say they entered through this Leela. Well, obviously they had to be there before that, but it means the intensification of their bhav came at this point, which qualified them. Now they're perfect, capable of going to Golok. This is what Krishna is doing here. We find in the Rasa Leela that it is also a portal. How is that? We find that the Vedas, the Shruti Upanishad, the Upanishads personified, who wanted Gopi Bhav, the sages of Dandakaranya. These are two groups, some individuals as well, sadhana siddhas, pursuing Gopi Bhav through Gopal mantra. They took birth in the Prakat Leela. And when the night of the Rasa Leela came, which is a time in which Krishna, I want to say, well, his relationship with the gopis is like confirmed, right? It's, what's the word used? Consummated. Consummated the relationship. He told them during the Vastaharna Leela, when he stole their clothes, technically we're married, but we'll consummate the relationship in another occasion, a year later. That's the Rasa Leela, right? So at that time, again, he appeared with each and every gopi, and there you go. But some gopis, it's described, they couldn't go. They were stopped by their husbands. And that stopping caused separation at such an important time. And that separation caused their affection to grow fonder, and it qualified them. So that later, as mentioned a few chapters later, maybe 10, 15 chapters later, also consummated their relationship with Krishna. So this is what it means, that it's a portal, that there are opportunities in that prakat. Let's take the coward boys. What about that? Well, we can give a similar idea. During the Brahma Vimohan Lila, at the end of the Kumar Lila, which is what time it's taking place, the boys met with Krishna on a picnic, and here we go. And Krishna manifests before each and every one of them and let them know, you're my best friend. Each and every one of them felt Krishna's my best friend and he loves me the most and they're all right and so on. So one can make the argument that as he expanded with all the gopis to consummate his relationships within Sakyarasa, also this kind of sharing in confidence was what took place at this time. Now, Narmasakas, they'll have to wait for further qualification during the Poganda Lila, when Krishna suddenly decides in the middle of the day that I think I want to check out some of the forest here. Just let me go with a couple of boys, and he takes the Narmasaka Bhav with him. That time, of course, they meet with the gopis, and so. But this is the idea, that how to understand the idea that the Prakat Lila is a portal to the Aprakat Lila. Again, this intensification of Bhav is difficult to come by. It's possible. You can really enter into the text of the Bhagavatam, which is the Prakat Lila. Same idea, anyway. You need the Prakat Lila. Therefore, we're focusing on it here first, right? So, that said, seeing this, right, the cows coming down and so forth, the herdsmen were frustrated and embarrassed by their inability to prevent it, but when they followed the difficult downhill course of the cows and saw their sons there with the calves, their hearts surged with rasa, thus their frustration and embarrassment that they couldn't herd the cows properly were mitigated, and they hoisted their sons up, embraced them, smelled their heads. I think we said this, but here the text says, and attained anurag. Okay, here it comes. The furthest reach of their sthayi bhav. Then, in due course, the adult gopas slowly departed, leaving their sons with great difficulty, their minds happy from embracing their boys, tears welled up in their eyes, remembering them. So again, this is the scene that Balarama has witnessed. And as a result of that, he knows, it's clear to him now, wait a minute, these calves are like second generation. They've already had a couple other calves, and why they're so affectionate to them. Look at the affection of the parents. And what's happening again is Krishna is relaxing the Yogamaya illusion that he created to bewilder even Balaram. And in bewildering Balaram, by this power, he is underscoring to all of us the measure of his Aishvarya, which he wants to show, of course, to Brahma and all of us, right? Krishna's too, Bhagavan Swayam. He's even the source of Balaram. He has power even greater than Balaram, who has unlimited power. Now, how can that be? Balaram did not know the measure of Krishna's power. Isn't this a problem, theological problem? I mean, he's God. He didn't know the power of Krishna's power. Well, the answer is that Krishna doesn't know the measure of his own power or the measure of his own knowledge. How is that not a contradiction? Well, because there is no measure to his power and knowledge. So if you don't know something that doesn't exist, doesn't mean there's something that you don't know. You're still omniscient. He doesn't know the measure of his own power. And Balaram didn't either. But Balaram knows this. Krishna's too, Bhagavan Swayam. Krishna's my source, and he's got showing power here that I can't even show. That has even bewildered me. What to speak of a simple four-headed guy like Brahma? A part of the world. This is in the Leela itself. Even Balaram has become bewildered. Of course, amongst everybody, he's coming out of it, understandably. And so he will ask about it, and Krishna will try to explain it and so on and so forth, and you'll accept it to one extent or another, so be it. And then, of course, Brahma will now, coming next, Brahma will return on the scene, right? And he will see that, well, we have to get to this, but he will see all the calves and the cowherd boys are in the cave. No, wait a minute, all the calves and cowherd boys are with Krishna. No, they're in the cave. Is he moving them back and forth? What's going on? And then he realizes that's not happening. And then Krishna will turn the thing into, just for Brahma, he'll show him everything, showing himself to be all these boys, all Vishnu forms appearing. And this is then the culmination of the lesson that Brahma will learn. We'll get to this in our next class. Bhagavatam ki jai. Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Any question? Yes.
If you'd be interested in sharing why you see Krishna and Balaram as the same height instead of one taller than
Oh, well, I see them more as friends than in terms of the Vatsalya aspect. I like that more. Equals. It's more central to who they are. To me, it's more incidental that he's elder, and it's a bit of a ruse. Balaram will protect Krishna. Prabhupada had a pose of Krishna and Balaram in his heart as manifested as his deities in Vrindavan. And what do you see there? And this is the famous pose of Krishna you'll see all over the world. Nowadays, wherever there's a Krishna and Balaram deity, it'll be in this pose, more or less. The essence of it is what? How are they posed? Krishna's holding his flute, right? And Balaram is resting on his shoulder. So Prabhupada's question is, who's stronger, Krishna or Balaram? And someone said, Krishna's the older brother, he's stronger. Prabhupada would say, well, why is he leaning on Krishna then? Krishna's holding him up. This was his idea. Krishna's his way of saying, Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam. Even he has his power even to delude or whatever, to enlighten, exceeds that of Balaram. So he looked at it in that way. So, and Krishna and Balaram and Vrindavan, they're the same size. I was fortunate to offer the first artiks to Krishna and Balaram after they were installed. It was a big event. Prabhupada installed the Krishna Balaram deities, and a big event in Vrindavan. All kind of dignitaries came, Brahmins, sages, and whatnot. It was a huge event. And it was an event in which Prabhupada sought acceptance on the part of Vrindavan, on behalf of all of his disciples from all over the world, who a lot of people didn't want to touch or get near or stand in the shadow of, because they had ideas of what Western people were like and did not fully understand the power of bhakti. So he wanted us to be accepted there, and this was a big event for him. I was very much involved in helping to make that happen. We were distributing books, a particular group of us, devotees under my care, and all the money that we were raising was going directly to Prabhupada to build the Krishna Balaram temple. Prabhupada noted that, and it was at one point it was engraved in the wall. This Sankirtan party, which is the one I led, built this place, and two other sannyasis, Guru Kripa and Yashoda, they were collecting money in Japan. I don't know if they removed that because all three of us are no longer in ISKCON. They might have, but Prabhupada put it there. Not that we cared, but at any rate, I was very much emotionally involved in, invested in the Krishna Balaram temple, what it meant to Prabhupada. I had some idea about that. So, and I was there. I took sannyas just after that, there in Vrindavan. But in the evening, for a few nights after the ritual was completed and the deities were installed, then Prabhupada would come to the Artik with some governor or His Highness or some royal guy or something like that, and showcase these Western devotees offering Artik to Krishna and Balaram and so forth. So I being emotionally invested in that as I was, I wanted to be able to offer artik, not myself so much, but I wanted some of the members of my party, brahmacharis, to have the opportunity, not to be shy, that you guys did this, so you should take note. They wouldn't go on without me, and there were 3 altars. So I said, well, I'll offer the artik to Krishna and Balaram, and then this one by Sheshika, I think was offered to Gornitai, and I think the other one was Suradas, and God brother of mine recently passed away, would offer to Radhasham Sundar. Those are the 3 altars. So we just went up, me and the lead, and said, we're going to offer artik tonight. They said, well, yeah, you can't do that. What do you, this has to be. And I don't know, I just pushed my way through. I said, we're doing it, we did this, we helped to make this happen. And they couldn't touch me, Prabhupada liked me. So it was hard to touch. I used to go out on the morning walks with Prabhupada and the sannyasis and the GBC, and I wasn't a sannyasi. They'd all look at me like, what are you doing here? And Prabhupada would ask me questions, and what are the people saying that you're talking to, and so forth. And they couldn't touch me. So anyway, such is my audacity, but there we were on the altar. This is a nice little story. So the way they were doing this was like super choreographed, the whole thing, and the guy who had the Krishna Balaram altar, he would give it like a slight nod like this to the other 2, and they would step forward, go down, light the incense, rise together, step back, a nod, begin, ring the bell. Like, so the whole thing was just like super choreographed and poetry in motion. Well, it didn't work out that night like that. Somebody dropped something, one guy and another, and they were nervous and so on and so forth. And there was Prabhupada. I'm looking back, and he's right there in front of the Krishna Balaram temple with some dignitary, and I know it's not going right, So, after the artik, Prabhupada said, who was offering that artik? And then they said, that's Tripurari. And he's mentioned, oh, Tripurari, okay. So, Baba Grahi Janardana, that's not an excuse, whoops. That's not an excuse for doing things wrong, but it is a fact that the spirit behind it, the intention, may override any technical difficulty that may arise in the course of offering service. The famous story there, of course, is of Vidura's wife offering the bananas to Krishna when he arrived at Hastinapur, and Duryodhana had cooked a huge feast for him, everything perfect, and he just ignored it, went to the house of Vidura, who was his devotee, because Duryodhana wasn't. And he said, I'm hungry. She said, I know, you come for a feast. There's a big feast. He said, no, I'm hungry now. Have you got anything to eat? No, I didn't cook anything. Well, there's some bananas. Give me a banana. So she gives him a banana. In her ecstasy, she's peeling the bananas and giving him the peels and throwing away the banana. And Krishna was, of course, eating the peels. When news was brought, and Vidura went with Nard to the house, and then Vidura said something like, well, this is amazing that Krishna's just accepting the offering. And then Nard said, yeah, he's eating the peels to underscore it, right? And relishing them. So we shouldn't offer banana peels, but still, your heart's in the right place. And it's hard to go wrong in bhakti, which is just the polar opposite of the other end of the religious spectrum. Prem bhakti being rag bhakti, the highest end, where there's love, there are no rules. On the other end is varnashram worship, where there are thousands of rules and there's very little love. And if you don't do the rules right, you won't get the results. So just the opposite. It's not an excuse for not doing things right. If you're sincere and your heart's in the right place, because you'll want to do them correctly. A little bit of a side. Yes, Marge.
2 questions have been sent here in the chat, so there's time. First one is from Sarada. She's asking, in terms of not knowing the measure of Krishna's own power, is the term called Krishna Bhagavan Swayam? And is the term Krishna Prema Maya, is that term for being overwhelmed with Krishna's love?
Prema Maya means Krishna is overwhelmed with love, yes. He has a particular quality that distinguishes him from Narayan or any of Narayan's avatars, 4 of them actually, and one of them is Prema Madhurya. It's the same idea. Premamai, filled with praying. He is filled with praying, the kind of praying in which he interacts with the inhabitants of Braj, which we don't see anywhere else. He has Lila Madhurya, sweet Leelas, sweet praying, sweet flute, Venu Madhurya, and Rupa Madhurya, sweet form. These are his four qualities. But yes, Premamai means, yes, actually, Krishna is called Lila Purushottam. And sometimes Mahaprabhu is called Prem Purushottam. But he's Krishna too. But how is he Krishna? Prem Purushottam. That he's pursuing the prem of Radha, right? By which he experiences something about him that he can't experience himself. He needs to see himself from her vantage point. He knows that she's experiencing something in rasa and prem that exceeds his own experience. But he also realizes it's a result of her experiencing something in him. So it's in him, but she can bring it out. So he tries to take her position. That is Chaitanya Lila. Now, otherwise, he said it was prem. What was her question? There's two things.
The one.
Swami Bhagavan.
Yeah, that's connected to Krishna not knowing the measure of his own power.
Swami Bhagavan connected to Krishna not knowing the measure of his own power. Well, Swami Bhagavan means Krishna, the original Krishna, Krishna in his fullest expression. And in his fullest expression, the fullest expression of the Godhead, his knowledge is covered by the prem. So in a sense, yes. Thank you for the question. Are you still in Canada? Yes. Okay. It's warm down here. You should visit sometime. Got snow up to the eyes, huh? Yeah. She says. Next question.
Two questions interconnected by Indra, Vaya. She says, Hare Krishna, maybe it's too personal of a question, but when you, Maharaj, gave the article in the Sri Krishna Balar Mandir, did you already know about your affinity for Sakyaras? And when did it dawn on you that Prabhupada also liked Sakyaras? Did you know from early in the beginning?
It was very apparent to me and others as well that Prabhupada's affinity was for Sakyaras. In fact, he in our book, Oh My Friend, some anecdotes that support that are cited, a number of them. So it was a common current, if you will. It wasn't something that was discussed, talked about in any measure, but it was something, well, that I was quite clear on without thinking deeply about it. I can't say that I spoke to others about it. I assumed others also felt that way. And in years later, I find out that to be the case as I spoke with God brothers and so forth. Rasa Tattva was not, a very prominent topic in those days. Prabhupada was introducing basic concepts, and he had a strong focus on reaching out to other people, distributing literature, and so on and so forth. Yeah, it was I would say it was quite unspoken, prominent notion that Prabhupada's affinity was for Sakyarasa. And there were some paintings in which Sakyarasa was portrayed that I would always stand in front of in the temple, in the Dudwarka temple, and chant in front with a longing to enter into the cowherding leelas of Krishna and Balaram. I mean, I didn't know all the things I know now, with all the theory and so forth. But that said, when Prabhupada opened the Krishna Balaram temple, that was a very prominent event in Prabhupada's life for reasons I explained externally. He'd come home, where he started, he left there, bringing back to Godhead, and took him around the world. And now he's got a place in Vrindavan that was donated to him, and in Ramanreti, and which was a place for Krishna's cowherding pastimes, and he's got Krishna and Balaram there. Huge event for him externally and for him internally as well. And at that time, the Krishna Balaram deities, there were the three altars. I mean, they obviously stood out, and it was through inspiration directly shared, bestowed upon me from Krishna Balaram deities in Vrindavan that I ended up taking sannyas just a few days or so later. So I was always very dedicated to Krishna Balaram deities. Now, years later, when I met Sridhar Maharaj, he brought this topic up to the fore. And he felt, I believe, that, as I said the other day, Prabhupada had put so many things inside of us. Now he was gone. During his presence, we were busy outreaching to other people, preaching and so forth. Now maybe we should slow down here, boil the milk, which Prabhupada himself has said at times, reflect on what he gave and so forth. So topics concerning rasa, the prayojan of prem and details were something that our spiritual uncle, Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj, was more inclined to speak about, and I think it was an appropriate time. So the topic came up more directly than it would or ever did really in circles within ISKCON. And it came up in the context of Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj referring to Prabhupada's prayer on the Jaladuta, which he had practically, at least the core of it, the essence of it, memorized by heart, which was quite surprising. And he gave a translation of the first line, the refrain of the verse, which we wouldn't have, no translator in ISKCON came up with. Their translation was very static and very much corresponded with the emphasis of the time, outreach, preaching, and so forth. For example, how does it start? It says, Krishna Taba Punya Habe Bhai. Krishna Taba, where is she? Krishna Taba Punya Habe Bhai. So they translated it, my dear brothers, Bhai. Pujapad Sridhar, it was in English said to be, probably called it prayer to Lord Krishna. He's praying to Krishna. Sridhar Maharaj translated it, Krishna Taba Punya Habe Bhai. My dear friend, Krishna. He's speaking to Krishna. He's not speaking to his friends. My dear friends, let me tell you something. The verse goes on to say, Krishna Taba Punya Habe Bhai. Radharani Kushi Habe. What is that? You have it? Mars looking. Dhruva Ati Boli Tomata. He said, they translated like, this is a truth known, like this pole star Dhruva that doesn't move, it's fixed forever, that if you please Radharani, if she's pleased with you, then your life will be successful. So they translated, my dear brothers, something like this, but Sridhar Maharaj translated it, my dear friend, my dear Bhai, Krishna, I want to tell you something, remind you of something. If Radharani is pleased with you, well, then your life will be successful. Well, that will get Krishna's ear. And he needed Krishna's ear because he had a big request. He said, we went on to say, my Guru Maharaj, who is in your camp, being a Manjari of Radha, has asked me to do something that's formidable, to go to the Western world and preach Krishna consciousness, and I don't know where to begin. So I think it would be good for you to give me that power that I may please Radha's Manjari, so that Radha then will be pleased with you. That will be good for you, Krishna. This way he intimately negotiated with Krishna, and obviously Krishna agreed and gave him a lot of power. What power did he give him? He said, well, let's not give it in short measure. We'll give the whole of Nityananda Vesh, Nityananda Ram. We'll let Nityananda reside within him for a number of years and spread it like wildfire everywhere. So he knew how to get Krishna's attention, very wise, like a Priyanarmasaka, speaking about his romantic life and advising him. So, so he would bring this up, or it came up. And so this brought up in me, maybe some others, but in me, all the feelings that I weren't voiced and discussed at the time, kind of like a very nice confirmation of them. Now, some of my God brothers were more influenced by the Baba Sridhar Maharshi, who were disciples of Prabhupada. They had not been as affected internally by Prabhupada's own bhava. So they moved under the auspices and direction of Sridhar Maharshi in the direction of Manjari Bhav. But it was not the case for me. So anyway, you asked the personal question. It is very personal. I've answered. Thank you. Anything else? Yes.
I was just wondering if you could, what the distinction between presiding over Sambandha Rupa and presiding over Hasya is. Like Sambandha Rupa, you say it's Dasya, Vatsalya, and Sakya. What's the difference between presiding over the Balaram presiding over those and Balaram presiding over Hasya?
Well, I think that one thing is that is the idea that he presides over Hasya is, again, something that you'll find in Indian aesthetics, which is also has obviously a religious color. And how they arrived at that, Bharat or whomever, Muni, whoever did that, I don't know. And they wouldn't have given any justification. It's just, accepted. So there has to be a presiding deity over everything, right? Now, when you say that Balaram is the presiding deity over these rasas, this is more of a Gaudiya idea. So we're accepting what the previous aestheticians have said about Balaram with regard to who presides over what rasa. Rupa Goswami lists it in Bhakti-Rasamrita Sindhu, but this idea is more developed. He has these components. He expands servitors, arguably in these rasas, to be the eternal Parshadas, associates of Krishna, and so forth. So I wouldn't say there's a difference, but he presides over more than one thing. We just cited 4 of them, right? 3 rasas and 4 rasas. But yeah, I can't say much more than that about it. The Gaudis would emphasize the Sambandha Rupa and these components. Rupa Goswami doesn't say anything about him presiding over Sakya Rasa, other than he's a presiding deity over Sakya Rasa. It comes from somewhere else. We take it, add it. Yes.
The presiding color over Sakya Rasa is described as Aruna, which I understand to mean sunrise, colors of the sunrise.
Yeah, kind of a rust. Yeah.
And I was wondering, because I've heard you describe it as the shade rust orange, and I was wondering how you.
The what?
I've heard you describe it as the shade of rust orange. I was wondering how you arrived at that color from Aruna.
Yeah, it means reddish brown. It's rust is a way of saying reddish brown. You're probably thinking, well, the sun doesn't look reddish brown when it rises, right? But it depends where you are. If you're in Bengal, it does. And you're in the Bay of Bengal, in Mayapur, and there's just rice field and rice field and rice field. And then the sun comes up on the horizon. It looks like a fiery, rust-colored ball that you just reach out and touch it. It's very far out. It's very otherworldly. There, the sun has just set itself down and waiting for Gore to wake up, and then it will start to dance and rise across the sky. So there it looks that color.
Would you say it connects with Sakya Rasa because
So the sun?
Or the
Sun is Mitra. Mitra means friend.
like,
He's very friendly in terms of the helping, assisting the romantic life of Radha and Krishna. Also in midday, which is most difficult time for them to meet in midday. But he followed the Leela and he participates in that and makes it possible. All right, we'll stop there. Shri Shri Raja Gopal ki jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Gaur Premanandi. Hari Hari Bol.
The Guru Maharaj.